Welcome to Leaders and Legends. Today we have a guest I'm really excited to have on, Trey. He's a speaker, he's an author, he's an entrepreneur, he's an actually recognized expert in entrepreneurship and business strategy. He's come from running 2 national franchise brands. He's also a Georgia dog.
That's true.
All right.
Go Dogs.
Attended Georgetown U and studied franchise management. He's also a husband and a father to his wife Megan and his son Wyatt, who I've learned about the last time we met. He's got a book called Boss Brain. It's about the decline of entrepreneurship in America, and he's got some scientific proven methods to help increase our innate abilities to be more free and less captive to the 9 to 5, right?
Well said. Well said.
And I love the tagline. The tagline to rescue 1 million entrepreneurs from traditional employment.
Yeah.
I feel like that was me 5 years ago. And his book won an award at the American Book Fest. And so there's a few things I want to just learn from you and just talk to you about. I mean, tell me about, first of all, sort of what led you to writing the book, and so sort of like what are the things you've gone through to get to this point, where you're at now.
Yeah, the franchise world that I came from years ago, I've been out of it for probably a decade or so now, but it's filled with entrepreneurs, and that's wonderful, right? You're just surrounded by can-do, let's go after it kind of people. But I noticed through that period that there was a large percentage of them who had this duality about them where they really knew they wanted to do this. They wanted to be an entrepreneur. They wanted to own their own business. They want to be self-employed. And they just couldn't translate that optimism, that inspiration into action. And there obviously was a percentage who could, but I was kind of wowed by the ones who just very obviously wanted this and couldn't unstick themselves from what I call in the book predictable adequacy.
Yeah.
So eventually I distilled it down into, there's about 65 different scientific studies in the book that kind of tell us how a lot of times most of the time, our perspectives are skewed by our psychological biases and cause us to not see things objectively and really have a tendency to make us want to build walls around ourselves and perpetuate our survival, right? Not be the best person, entrepreneur, husband, father, citizen we can possibly be. So I finally got a book out of a couple of years ago. And in a lot of ways, it's the tenets of what I use in my everyday life as an entrepreneur as well.
That's really cool. I posted it earlier, but the line about the American dream and what it sort of has become.
Yeah, it's not what Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac tell you.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's freedom. And the more I talk with people who are entrepreneurs, the more I experience that freedom. Right.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons that drives me to do what I do. But tell me a bit about sort of where you came from, the franchise world, and what you're doing there, and how that sort of translated you into where you are now.
Sure. If you can't tell by the accent, I grew up on a farm in Georgia, and I do mean out in the sticks. I grew up 10 miles from a red light. In the town that had that red light, there were only 5 red lights in that town. So I grew up really in the middle of nowhere. And that's a place where there are no now hiring signs. People aren't trying to bring you on and give you a salary. That just doesn't happen. You find your way there. You create value by the sweat of your brow and your own ingenuity, or you don't really find your way. Everybody there that isn't an entrepreneur either works for the paper company, the railroad, or is a farmer. That's about it.
Yeah.
So I thought that it was just natural that everybody was going to have their side hustle, have their, hey, I've got an idea and here's what I want to do with it, because that's where I came from. There was no other option.
Right.
And that landed me in the franchise world. Not coincidentally, that was purely by accident. My undergraduate degree is in exercise physiology. It had nothing to do with this, right? But it's not surprising looking back on now. Being surrounded by entrepreneurs is a really awesome place to be, right? You have everybody kind of rowing in the same direction. And the franchise world taught me a lot about trying to maintain the culture of an organization over a large or fragmented geography. And that's tough to do.
Yeah.
I apply it these days because Fleet Force, one of the ventures I have, has a location in Fort Lauderdale and a location in Panama City. And the employees at those two have never met one another. So it's hard to maintain the core values and the culture and the mission when
Yeah.
we don't have that opportunity to spend time and break bread together every day. And the franchise industry taught me how to do that.
Yeah. That's so crucial, right? The values that you instill in your organization and how that's going to translate into the goals you're looking to accomplish, your
Yeah.
vision, right? Um, so you mentioned Fleet Force, you mentioned your current venture. It sounds
Yeah.
like there's a few of them. What are some of the things you're working on now?
Yeah, well, Fleet Force has become the largest training provider for CDL in the state of Florida. 3 years ago, we had one location. When I acquired the business, it had a different name then. Um, One location training 7 to 9 people a month, something like
Yeah,
that. We're going to train close to 3,000 this year.
that's awesome.
And I'm not going to take credit for that. There's this enormous pent up demand. The industry is thirsty for it. There are a lot of people looking for their second and third career
Yeah.
who within 4 weeks can be lifted out of generational poverty. So I'm not going to take credit for any of their hard work, but we were right place, right time for that industry, and have a waiting list at virtually every location for folks that are trying to be professional drivers. And honestly, you can't name another job where you could close your eyes, put your finger on a map, and whatever city you land on, you could move there and have a job in 24 hours, except for truck driving or nursing. The
Mm,
difference is truck driving you can do in 4 weeks.
yeah.
Nursing takes you a couple of
It's a
years.
couple of
So
years.
we
Yeah.
tell our drivers you should marry a nurse,
Yeah.
and then you're both always
Yeah,
employed.
some
Yeah, always employed.
flexibility. Wow, that's awesome. How many locations now do you
So
have?
we're 10, but we just signed our 11th MOU with Santa Fe State College up in Gainesville last week. So
Awesome.
that'll be our 11th. And it's exciting because these are underserved communities where
Yeah,
there are just a ton of families who could benefit for this kind of training.
right.
You're talking about taking somebody from minimum wage to 80 grand a year in 5 weeks. Life
Yeah,
changing, right?
that's a
Life changing money.
yeah, I mean, I see all sorts of incomes and the work we do, and if you can be around that with another spouse, dual income in that space,
No
you
doubt.
can be and you're good with your money. I mean, there's a little
Right.
caveat, but
Right.
and you're decent with your money. Yeah, you can live a good life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. No doubt about it.
that's awesome. Um, so with Fleet Force, what's some of the things that what are some of the, I guess in general with all the things you've been working on, some of the challenges you faced, some of the struggles, and maybe how that shaped your sort of path forward or things you've learned from those things.
Yeah, I'm drawn to and try to promote startups that are human centric. It's easy in business to think of everything as being transactional,
Yeah.
and I find that to fall short of what I think true entrepreneurship really is. Right, lifting up those around you, and by virtue, everyone benefiting.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm drawn to that industry because there are so many families who can benefit. So I try to distill that same, or excuse me, instill that same mentality of blessing and paying forward my blessings to others.
Yeah.
And by virtue of that, the whole community benefits, the whole state benefits. My grandchildren one day benefit,
Yeah.
and I think of it as cyclic. And the challenge I face there is really getting buy-in on those values from every member of the team. I'm blessed at Fleet Force by and large. Most of the folks know our core values. They know we live by them.
Yeah.
They know that they can make you or break you at that organization.
Yeah.
The first of which is gratitude. So if you're a naysayer, if you're negative moaner who complains a lot, probably not going to fit in at this organization, and that's okay. Doesn't mean we're better than you. It just
Yeah.
means this is not where your destiny lies. But I
Yeah.
think that's where the challenge is the challenge is finding people who buy in and drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah. There was a in your book you talked about optimism and pessimism,
Oh yeah,
and optimism being the sort of trait that has perpetuated our race,
no
right?
doubt.
But it is so important. Culture and getting people to buy into the culture and really not just superficially, like really believe it. And there's some brands out there that I can think of now, but only a handful
Right.
that really can demonstrate that. People say they're a cult, but the reality is they just really are wrapped around the vision and care, right? What are some of the things you've had to face, or what have you done, I guess, to help make that possible in your organization or in just other things you've done?
Yeah, it's important to remember that culture is binary, and by that I mean you are in or out.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as sort of fitting in.
Mm,
Right? You and I have both been somewhere in life where we didn't fit in, and
Yeah.
no one had to tell us that we didn't fit in,
Right.
right? We just knew
Yeah.
I probably shouldn't be here,
Yeah.
right? This is probably not the place for me, whether it was personally or professionally.
Yeah.
So, um, embracing the binary nature of that is tough because it means if you're not meant to be there, it means you're meant to be somewhere else, and that's
Yeah.
hard for some folks. They may live in that role longer than they should, and that's not good for them. That's not good for the company.
Yeah.
Um, Fortunately, I think most people arrive at this on their own if that's not if they're not consistent with that culture. So you go through this really painful distillation in the early part of trying to scale a business where you're trying to bring new talented team members on, you're trying to build up a group of folks who have their own initiative that you don't have to manage on a daily basis, but inevitably you are losing some of those along and along while you're going through that distillation. So it's
Yeah.
hard to grow something and distill it at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy, in looking to bring on, staff for our company. I feel like we went through so many people,
It's
and there
hard.
were great people, and
Yeah.
there wasn't necessarily anything wrong with any of them. But
Yeah.
you're like, are you bought in to what we're building?
Right.
And then you're like, am I just gonna say yes to this person just because it's a person and it's hard to fill a seat right now, right?
Right.
And you don't want that. And certainly innate challenge and getting them to be bought in because they're just trying to get that job, right?
Yep.
And so that's really interesting. What motivates you right now to keep? I know you mentioned legacy. You mentioned doing something that's going to affect a lot of lives. What are some of the things that are motivating you towards, down the road and where sort of is down the road? What are sort of your end goals with a lot of this?
I've got a tech startup right now that launches in June that I'm super excited about because I'm new to that industry.
Yeah.
The problem we're solving is not necessarily unknown to me or strange to me, but using tech to do so is brand new for me. So I'm
Yeah.
learning a lot about the tech world and the coding and the software world. So in so many ways, I have to surround myself with people who really know what they're doing
Yeah.
there and speak up when I don't know what acronyms they're using and what that means and why that matters. Um,
Yeah.
but I think I'm going to post Fleet Force whenever that may be down the road. I think I want to continue this human centric startup where either the businesses that I open or the business that I help other people open are always focused around making society better, increasing the quality of life, and really leaving the world a better place than I found it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that's a wonderful mission. And I was just at a conference last week, and more and more as I heard some of these names, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tyler Perry,
Right.
um, they got theirs.
Sure.
They made it, right?
Yep.
And they're like, what's my purpose
Yeah.
now?
Yeah.
And you hear with all this money or success, it's great, but how are we impacting people to make things better? And you often find that where what are we doing now? And so it's a noble mission, and you have the platform and ability to do it, and it's awesome. You can, share knowledge like this, like your
Right.
book, and bring quality of life to others and help them lead those lives.
Yeah, in the book, I talk about the difference between ambition and legacy, and there's nothing wrong with ambition. I'm an ambitious guy, but
Right.
ambition is kind of what you do for yourself, right? They're
Mhm.
the blue ribbons, the trophy case, the certificates on the wall, the things that say, "Hey, I did this."
Yeah.
In 100 years, that probably won't matter, right? But legacy is really how you've impacted others, both while you're here and after you're gone. That will matter.
Yeah.
And I say a lot that 300, 250, 300 years from now, I don't know that the average global citizen at that point will know what Microsoft is, but they'll know what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is,
Yeah.
right? They'll know that that's the foundation that brought quality of life, right? Clean drinking water, a variety of other, healthy, productive lives, as they like to say,
Sure.
to people around the globe, and that will have a greater impact than Microsoft Office ever did.
Yeah. Yeah. Legacy is it's unique to everyone, right? It's got
I hope so.
your own unique meaning to
Yeah.
everyone. Um, are there people? So as you came up, talk about legacy, right? From your family and what things that maybe you've learned. Are there other people in your life that have been there along the way? Because often we find that sometimes you're like going along the road and you're like, I'm just doing this on my own, right? Until you may find somebody like a mentor or somebody who you can look
Sure.
up to, or someone who just came along the way and helped you make a decision, right? Is there anybody in your life that was there either from early on in life or throughout this journey that has been supportive to you? And maybe what are the things what's the importance of somebody like that to you, in all this?
Yeah, well, there's two answers to this. So obviously, there's the familial and family portion of this where I'm the youngest of four, and my mother was a widow. My father passed when I was 7 years old. So she worked very hard. We all went to college. We're all entrepreneurs. By every objective metric, she succeeded. In
Yeah.
ways that are really mind-boggling, considering she delivered the mail on dirt roads for the
Oh
U.S.
yeah.
Postal Service. So those things matter. But I'll tell you what's interesting to me now. What really inspires and motivates me now is when I meet folks that are significantly younger than I am. I'm 50, by the way. And
Would never be able to notice that, man. You're looking fit.
I would say it's all that clean living, but we know that's
Maybe
not
it's
true.
that fast you
Yeah,
just
right,
did.
maybe so. But I'm 50, and when I see folks that are significantly younger than me, and I see them just kicking ass, right?
Yeah.
I look back and I remember doing keg stands when I was in my 20s, and I'm like, oh God, I wish I had been that person, right? I
Yeah.
wish I had been more like that person and
Yeah.
gotten started sooner.
Yeah.
So in strange ways, I'm actually motivated by people who are way younger than me, who just have their ducks in a row way better than I did. And I like watching those guys and say, they're going to be way more successful than me, right?
Yeah.
That is just amazing to watch them do it. So I get motivated by that
Is
heavily.
that inspiring when you meet somebody like that? I often meet these guys in their 20s and they're planning to buy some real estate and they're saving their money. And I'm like, my 20s, I think I just got out of college with 2 engineering degrees with not even a clue what I was going to do.
Yeah, man, I feel you.
And
I'm the same
we're
way.
just like, oh, let's go out to Siesta Key and
Sure.
go to the
Yeah,
bar and hang out
absolutely.
and we'll figure it
Yeah.
out eventually. It's
Yeah.
like,
So in a lot of ways, I look back. I wouldn't call it with regret, but
yeah,
I look back on it and I'm motivated at this age, probably more so than I would be if I didn't see others
yeah,
who on their trajectory are just going to vastly
right.
exceed anything that I ever do. I love it. I think it's awesome to see.
Yeah, but still, well, time is finite, obviously, for all of us, but we have whatever time we want to make out of it, and the motivation allows you the energy to go do the things you want to do, and same for me. I mean, I feel like I'm late to the game, like you said, seeing these 20-year-olds,
Right.
but got a young family. I'm like, oh, there's so much going on already. If I started earlier, I wouldn't have all these other things going on, and here we are, right? But just the inspiration to do right by others and help others
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
successful. That's really cool. Tell me a little bit more about the book. I read I got a bit through this. And what are some of the other sort of big key takeaways you want people to get out of this, and if they're going to read it, that you want them to focus on?
Yeah, the book's unique in that it addresses on a macro basis this massive decline of entrepreneurship in America. So
Yeah.
since with every
Which
well,
surprised me, by the way.
no one believes it, man.
I'm
when
like,
I
with the
tell
gig
them.
economy and all these new people, I'm like,
yeah,
maybe think, but
yeah.
no.
So with very few exception, every year since 1945, entrepreneurship's decreased in America. And if you think about it, after the baby boom generation, post Second War, quality of life increased substantially,
Yeah.
right, for the whole nation. And as recently as the late 90s, 13.5% of Americans were self-employed. That number is now lower than 7%. So in 25 years, that's been cut in half. So on that trajectory, it means that in the mid 2045s, somewhere in there, 99% of us are going to work for the other 1%. And I tell that to people and they just absolutely do not believe me.
Right.
I can show you the graph. I can
No
go to the
way.
Department of Labor statistics because we all want to say, well, America is the most entrepreneurial country in the world, which also isn't true. We're third.
Yeah.
So if you measure that by the percentage of the population who wants to be self-employed, say that, let's call that your entrepreneurial spirit. We're third. So behind Portugal and Poland. Those Portuguese, man, they're no joke about being self-employed. Apparently you're talking about 30,
Yeah.
you're talking about 75, 80% of their population wanting to be self-employed.
Wanting to be.
Not
Yeah.
necessarily translating that.
Desire
So
to.
as a percentage of population, Bolivia is the highest in the world. So 36%, 1 in 3 people, right, on their own business.
Actually on their own business.
Actually on their own business,
Wow.
are self-employed, run their own little company, however you want to define that.
Yeah.
But I think that I know that this is bad for America. So the book is meant to address this on a macro basis by saying, show me any community in America where there's a high level of entrepreneurship and self-employment, and I'll show you a community that has longer lifespan, lower infant or higher infant mortality. It will say higher levels of civic engagement. They
Hmm.
vote more often,
Yeah.
more volunteerism for passion projects, more charitable contributions, right? The list just goes on and on for how it creates this harmonious
Yeah.
society.
More vigor for life, it sounds like.
Well,
Right?
it does. It's just good for society.
Yeah.
So the inverse is also true. You go to any community in America or city in America where it has almost no self-employment, and all of those metrics are on the other end. High crime, low life expectancy, low quality of life metrics. So it's saying that 99% of us might work for the other 1%, it means we're destining ourselves for a decreased quality of life.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't want that to happen. I'm a red blooded American. I don't want to
Right.
be in the twilight of my life and go, in my day, I remember
Yeah.
when 99% of us didn't
When
work for
things
the
were
other
good.
1%. So
Yeah.
on a macro basis, that's what the book is meant to address. On a micro basis, it's really simple. It helps the 100 million Americans who want to be self-employed navigate between traditional and self-employment.
Yeah.
Helps them get out of that job they're stuck in, figure out how to sort of traverse that unknown world between the two and become what they've always felt like they were destined to be.
Yeah. Why do we feel like well, the desire is high, but the actuality is low in certain environments?
Yeah, super high. So we're 70% in America. That means 100 million
Yeah.
Americans want to be self-employed. Tenfold difference between those who are thinking it and those
Yeah.
who are doing it. And there's really good reason for that. We are victims of our own success.
Mm.
From where you and I are sitting right now, there's probably 10 grocery stores within 5 miles of where we're sitting, if not 20,
Sure.
right? The poorest among us around this area have roofs over our head. The poverty level in the United States is 30% more than the median income for the globe,
Yeah.
which is mind-boggling
Yeah,
to say,
it
right? The
is.
poorest people in America make 30% more than half the globe. And I'm not implying that America's perfect,
No.
but we are just becoming complacent because of all of our predictable adequacy,
Yeah.
which is what I call it in the book. So why take the risk, right?
Yeah.
Why venture into the unknown when you've got that paycheck every 14 days and 2 weeks worth of vacation every year?
Comfort,
Comfort is
right?
the enemy of
It
progress.
is. Yeah. You know, it is it is crazy, but the more success, the more easy things become, the more likely you are not to want to change and
It's true.
right. And I have to remind myself of that, kids, because you have to remind yourself of that too as you're going through. Oh, we're doing pretty well here. Well, we need to build some discomfort into this so we can continue to
No
grow.
doubt.
Right? It's like at the gym, you get all of a sudden, "Hey, this is easy now. I can bench this," and like, oh,
Right.
they're not going to grow anymore. Then, right?
No doubt.
I don't know if you've listened to this or read this. Ray Dalio has the New World Order.
Yeah, I have.
Have you? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I did listen to that and talking about how where we came from as a country. I mean, it's a big, long arc. It's not just a
Right.
short term period of
Right.
time, but lines up perfectly with this, and it makes a lot of sense, right? You're sort of forced in other places to say, "Well, I gotta make it happen,"
Yeah.
or I'm going to be living this uncomfortable life. Here we could sort of choose. Well, I could really have a nice life, or I could do okay and be somewhere else where I'm not really that happy.
Yeah, and fortunately, we live in the land of opportunity. There's more startup and small business support programs in the United States than the rest of the
Yeah.
world combined, right? The SBA makes it exceedingly easy relative to the rest of the world,
Sure.
not easy, quote unquote, but relatively speaking,
Yeah.
to kind of have free training and free access and even dollars, right, for your business ideas. But more than that, we're a land of consumers.
Yeah.
Right. We're a land of people who, if you produce value and you solve a problem for me, I will pay you to do it.
Right.
And that doesn't make me unique. The whole nation's this way. So we live in a place where if you've got a good idea, you know it because people want it.
Right.
Right. People are asking for it. And if you are grinding uphill, trying to kick and scream and drag everybody along with you, maybe it's not the right idea.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's awesome. So, what are some of the things in general, not necessarily in business, but if someone was, let's say you came across somebody, they're looking to start a business, they are in a 9 to 5 right now.
Sure.
Um, they save some money, maybe they're preparing to make this happen. What are some of like the key lessons that if you had to distill to three things you'd tell them, what do they need to know that to keep, written down on the top of their ledger every day that you feel like has guided you or would help them innately find success?
Yeah, I think there's two important things. So the first is you got to understand the difference. I mean, you're in the financial world, you know this. You got to understand the difference between risk and uncertainty.
Hmm.
Those are two different things.
Right.
So is it uncertain whether your business survives or not? Of course. But the risk is easily quantifiable,
Sure.
right? The risk is, hey, I've got 5 grand. We're going to start a lemonade stand. And if I lose it, all I've lost was 5 grand,
Right.
right? So is it uncertain? Yes. But the risk is very quantifiable. And I think most people
Yeah.
think of entrepreneurship in the terms of uncertainty, and that's what gives them heart palpitations
Sure.
when they don't think of it in the terms of placing a bet on themselves.
Yeah.
Like if you're sitting at a gambling table and you have a stack of chips and you're willing to place a bet on yourself, how much are you willing to bet?
Yeah.
Like I'm willing to bet a lot on myself.
Myself.
I am. And I have lost
Especially
because
if I
of
can-
that overconfidence in the past, right? But I've
Yeah.
learned those lessons and now I've gotten more capable. So now I can confidently place those bets and go, no, I can risk a little more. I can do a little more. I think
Sure.
I can figure this out. So what are you willing to place as a bet on yourself? But the other part of this really is that I don't think people listen to the market. So everyone has their idea. Here's my business idea. They try for a variety of ways and they morph it and try to evolve, but somehow it just doesn't work. At some point, you just got to listen to the market and what they're telling you.
Yeah.
Because I'm not saying that every good idea was going to make you millions of dollars, but no bad idea has ever made millions of
Yeah,
dollars.
exactly. Exactly.
So you got to listen,
Yeah.
listen to what the market tells you. Maybe your prices are too high. Maybe you got a good idea, but you're charging too much. Maybe you're in the wrong location.
Yeah. I was just listening to a story about Warren Buffett when he bought Berkshire Hathaway for the first time,
Mhm.
the textile manufacturer, and like, well, there's not a lot of market for that. The future market for that was not doing well.
Sure.
And he's like, well, we got to pivot now.
Yeah.
This is not going to work. And he was a pretty smart guy, even though he was in his, I think it was late 30s at that point.
Yeah.
He had a lot of money behind him. It just wasn't going to happen. He had to pivot, and sometimes you got to pivot. And
Yeah, no doubt.
and that's great. I think it's important to remember those things, that if you're going to bet on yourself, also make sure your goals are big enough, right? I mean, if I think it's easy to be like, all right, I can give up on this because the goal isn't sort of consequential, right? It's like,
Sure.
oh, if I don't do this, then sure, I just make a little bit less money. I go back to this 9 to 5 job. I have a little bit less freedom because I have this, boss I got to report to every day.
Right.
Versus I'm looking to create something significant that's going to change the course of my family's legacy,
Sure.
right? It's a little bit harder to give up on that. And then you can figure out a way to pivot and adapt, right? And make
Right.
it happen.
Yeah.
Um,
I think having that personal benchmark, the guy who wrote the forward to my book, Daniel Crosby's first
Crosby.
book was actually called Personal Benchmark. And it's all about doing what you said, which is don't treat this like a never ending story where you constantly have to grow and there's an endless requirement to do so. You figure out what it is you're trying to get to,
yeah.
and then figure out what you have to do to back into that number, right? What the
Yeah.
metrics are to get to that, and try not to move the goalpost in the process. So I'm the king of moving the goalpost, by the way.
Yeah,
So
I do that too.
I can, dude, I this morning I responded on LinkedIn saying that I keep my goalposts on a rollable hydraulic jack so I can easily relocate them whenever they are approached, right? So I just grab it and push it
Yeah,
out farther.
yeah.
And it's just who I am. But I think it's important for people when they're entering this, especially in the beginning, not to do so, to be able to hit
Yeah.
a moment and reflect on that success and go, okay, I hit the goalpost without moving it. Now what?
Yeah.
Rather than I'm approaching it, let's push it farther out.
Well, that's your inborn spirit, right? That's you're going to impact a lot of people and a legacy, and so like, okay, we can make this bigger. We have the ability to do that. So why are we going to stop?
Yeah.
Right? What's
Yeah.
that additional purpose? Our goals were big coming into this year. I'm like, they're not big enough.
Yeah.
We got to move them out again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's important to do that. And sometimes you're going to fail or fall short, but I mean, you learn a lot in failure, right?
You should fail early and often.
Yeah.
The longer you wait, the more
Yeah.
painful those lessons are, right? You get
Yeah.
started before you're ready, you know you're not ready. So if you fall short a little bit here and there, it's okay. You knew you weren't ready when you started.
Yeah.
There is no such thing as being completely ready. So if you wait to that
Yeah.
point when you think, then you're really disappointed, right?
Right. Right.
Um, yeah, early and often on the failure part of it. I think in the end, I said this in the book, the difference between quitting and giving up. In Phil Knight's book, Shoe Dog, he says
Mm.
sometimes quitting is genius. Knowing when to quit and walk away is genius,
Yeah.
right? But just don't ever stop.
Yeah.
Keep going. You can quit what you're doing specifically, but keep going in some other way. A lot of people don't know before what became the CEO at Nike, he was an accountant. He worked as a car salesman. He had all these other little
Yeah.
jobs, and he was just trying to figure that out. And he was not good at a lot of those,
Yeah.
to be
Yeah.
honest
Yeah.
with you. So he failed, but he just didn't quit.
I love it.
I mean, I think I remember I think it was Winston Churchill that said, "You never really fail until you stop trying."
Yes. 100%. And isn't that interesting? Where his story and all that. And yeah, I mean, I could say similar things in my career. I pivoted a few times. I was supposed to be an engineer and horrible.
What kind of engineering did you study?
Civil, architectural.
Dude, this town needs you.
Yeah. Well, they didn't need me after the recession when I needed a job, and so I ended up in finance and
Yeah.
I'm like, wow, I'm not good at this either, and I ended up in tech. And then after I was working a 9 to 5
Yeah.
for good amount of years, did really well. It just was the end of the road, and I'm like, and I really thought hard about, I'll go back in 9 to 5. I'll just do something a little bit different, more freedom in a bigger role, right?
Right.
And ended up starting a business, which was the scariest moment of my existence. I'm like, oh, I'm starting from zero because I was doing pretty well and I was pretty comfortable,
Sure.
easily very comfortable, and so it was a little bit of a. I thought, oh, this is a failure. I got to start over, right? Let me start
Right.
over, and then you realize so much more freedom in this, so much more purpose, much more
Right.
fulfillment.
Right.
Having something that you really are driven to do, and you're doing it because you care about that.
Yeah.
Not because you're sort of demanded to do it.
Yeah. So self-employed entrepreneurs report way higher levels of life satisfaction, even though on average they work 15 or 20% more than someone who has a 9 to 5 job from an hourly perspective. I do. I'll work more than that.
Yeah.
But I will say that it's because I have I enjoy that. I
Yeah.
want to. I want to continue to press and grow and not just be complacent and plateau. If I said I want to take my son to Legoland, I'll take my son to Legoland. It's not that I can't do
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah.
So I take those opportunities where I can, but I think here's an interesting thing. So the word entrepreneur actually comes from an old Sanskrit word that means inner calling.
Mm.
And uh the French were in the spice world in the Bay of Bengal in the 1600s, and there were these monks there who they tried to hire, and the monks was like, no, I'm good. I don't need your paycheck. And they just couldn't believe they were trying to throw money at these guys, and they wouldn't become their employee. And said, why won't you do this? Look at all this money we're trying to give you. So the word they gave them in Sanskrit, which I won't try to say, sounded like entrepreneur in French, which is where that word came from. So it's no surprise that it means inner calling, because there's so many people who are just driven by that internally, and
Yeah.
it's quit thinking about it as quote unquote a job.
Yeah.
It's what
100%.
I am 100% doing what I was put on this planet to do. I
Yeah.
can tell you that right now.
That's great, man. Yeah, that's what people ask me all the time. And I work a lot of hours, right? But you don't feel like you're necessarily working. You're just doing what you should be doing. And
Yeah, dude.
that does lead me to a question, because you mentioned about taking your son Wyatt to Legoland. And one of the things that I always struggled with in the 9 to 5 was the work-life balance, quote unquote, work-life balance. It was always a thing, right? Like
Right.
that should be one of your goals too, work-life balance. I'm like, okay, but you don't really care about that. You really want me to work this job and not really have that balance. And I didn't have a good balance. I got out of shape. I was heavy. Health was going down the tubes. And I changed that around. And today I feel like it's more of like a work-life integration. Tell me a bit about that, intentionally doing things with your family, doing things that,
Yeah.
outside of this necessarily the job role, the work role. Like how are you managing that? And how should people look at that as they enter into being their own boss?
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend like I can give you a lot of life lessons on moderation because I'm an all or nothing kind of
Yeah.
guy. Like I'm just all in or completely out. But I will say that I think what most people really want, I don't think they want work-life balance. I think what they want is to work when they want to, not because they have to.
Yeah.
And that probably requires that you work very, very hard for a period of time and reach a point when you can pick and choose your projects.
Mm.
That doesn't mean you're just going to have this balanced where I'm 8 hours a day for the rest of my life, but then I get the evenings and maybe a couple of weeks if they give me permission to go somewhere. That's not work-life balance, right? Your
Uh,
life is still being dictated to you by someone who's approving your time off.
yep.
You spend more time with the folks at work than you do with your family, right?
Yeah.
That's easy math, even though this is a vestige of the industrial revolution, right? That we still
Right.
live in, this 9 to 5 kind of job. And in the end, do you look back on that and say, well, I'm really glad I had this balanced existence my whole life? I don't think anybody really feels that the balance is what they're looking for. They just want to reach a point where they go, I like that project. I
Yeah.
think I work on that project. Or I don't like the sound of that project at all. I'll take a hard pass on that one.
Yeah.
I think that's what everybody really wants. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be very wealthy. It just means you have to be right once
Yeah.
and smart enough with your money. You work with guys all the time about this to be able to be wrong a few times in the future, but you only have to be right once.
Yeah. That's right. And your point about saying no to a project, you can intentionally value things and prioritize things that you value more, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm gonna go take my son to Legoland or take my kids to Disney or spend time with them, just going, I don't know, taking a walk, right?
Right.
I'm intentionally can be there when I want to be there,
Yep.
and I can do the other 60 hours a week or 90 hours a week I want to do in anything else, right? And that freedom is so important to be able to do it when you want to do it. Not that you're going to take advantage of it.
Right.
Because
Right.
most, real entrepreneurs, when someone, oh, I'm working for myself, and you see them doing a lot of things, you're like, I don't think you're really bought into this. I think you're just sort of letting the time take
Right. Right.
over, right? But for somebody who's really bought into their purpose and mission, like you said, they're all in. And then they're also all in when they're spending time with their family, or they're also all in when they're doing something else, like a community service project or something, right?
Yep.
I saw that with you and the way you represented, the nonprofits when we were doing leadership, right?
Mhm.
Like you were all in on that. So, that's super important to have that mentality with all this. Like you said, betting on yourself, you better go
Right.
all in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
because failure is a real outcome.
Well, we talk about in the book. I talk about the first instinct that everybody has toward entrepreneurship is belief. And when you
Mm.
say belief, most people equate that with like faith, and that's not what I mean by that. Um, when I talk about belief, I really mean presuming that something is inevitable, right? You may call that faith from a religious standpoint, but belief is really comprised of three things. So if you want to believe something, here's how to go about that. You have optimism, which means you can envision some better future, some better job, some better financial position, whatever it is. And about 70% of us are wired to be
Mm.
optimists, just absolutely wired to be glass half full people.
Sure.
And I'm glad that not 100% of us are, or thousands of years ago, we all would have gotten on the same raft and drowned in a storm. And there
Sure.
you go. There's a few people who
Yeah.
are like, no, I'm good. You guys go.
I'm way
I'll stay
behind.
back. Right. I'm
Yeah.
good. I'm good. So that's a good balance. But the second part after optimism is self-efficacy. It's this embracing that I have the ability, like I have the efficacy required to make this happen.
Sure.
I have the network, I've got the grit, I've got the discipline, I've got all of those little things that makes me self-efficacy, makes you have self-efficacy. But none of that matters if you don't have the third part, which is action. So you can believe in a better future.
Yeah.
You can believe that you even have the ability to make that better future a reality. But if you don't do anything, nothing happens.
Yeah.
So action, believe it or not, is what has to come first. And belief, as a result of that, is reverse engineered. If you don't believe, you'll be successful.
Right.
The only way to change that is to do something even when you don't believe it. And over time, you'll start seeing yourself as a person of action.
Right.
Then you'll start seeing evidence that comes from those actions. And then you'll say, you know what? This might actually happen.
Yeah.
Right. But you gotta take the first step before you have any evidence that it's going to be successful.
Right. Give yourself those little wins that you are that person. not just you're trying to be that person, right?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, you got to make that first sales call, use a different name. If you sound like you're an idiot, they'll never know the difference, right? You'll say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have that person on the team anymore. That person didn't know what they're talking about, but I know now 3 months later what I should be saying."
Oh my God. Man, I made some cold calls in my day, and yeah, there were some rough ones for sure.
Yeah. What's surprising is I think most Americans, I think most citizens, most humans want others to succeed. I really do. I'm sure there's some people out there that just love watching other people fail,
Yeah.
but I don't think that that's true of most of us. And if you clearly articulate, "Hey, I'm starting out. Here's what I'm trying to do. Here's what I'm looking for," someone will go, "That's awesome that you're
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah.
Man, I wish I could do that. Let me see how I can help you." And I think most folks will try to nurture you along the way, even as a stranger.
Yeah. And typically, the people that aren't supporting you are the ones that are definitely not ahead of you.
No
They're
doubt.
they're self-conscious about something. There's some reason they're behind you, and they're just self-conscious that they're not taking that action you're taking, right?
No doubt about
And
it.
it's unfortunate, but they
That's
could go
true.
take that action, right?
Yeah, some of
The
you
haters.
you rarely get congratulated by people who have achieved less,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I feel bad for those folks because life's too short,
Yeah.
right? Not to lift each other up along the
Yeah.
way, and
Well, maybe they'll take a read of the book and change their perception on
maybe, man,
things,
yeah, maybe. I think that words have power,
Yeah.
and what you say, the universe, God, karma, whatever you want to call it, is listening to what you say. So the more you speak negativity, the more that's going to transpire in your
Yeah.
life, and
Yeah.
the more you are expecting the
Sure.
inevitable, be it positive or negative, the more it's
Yeah.
going to happen.
And I mean, the feedback, and you mentioned it with the belief and the action and the feedback loop, you can put yourself in there too. The less you believe, the more actualization of no achievement will happen. You're like, well, I guess I don't achieve, right? Versus the other feedback loop. And you mentioned it in the beginning of the book with the lies we tell ourselves and each other and all the things we're telling ourselves these things,
Right.
and others are telling ourselves these things, and we're letting it get to us, right?
Yep.
And so we just, it's not going to happen. So we need more people affecting, because everyone's got their own impact, right?
No doubt.
Right.
Yeah.
You have your own impact.
We
Maxwell's got
feel,
his impact.
yeah, we feel so, we forget that so much about quote unquote who we are is just a matter of timing,
Yeah.
right? That if I had been born in Virginia in the 1600s, I would have considered myself British. All right, 100 years later, maybe not.
Yeah.
Same house, same location, same everything, right? So, who you consider yourself to be is largely a matter of timing and the environment that you're around. So much of our behavior is dictated by your environment that if you don't carefully manipulate your environment, you'll become victim to it every single time, right?
Yeah.
You keep cookies in the cupboard, right? Then you're less likely to stay on your diet.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, this is funny. I still do this. So I have learned that my good habits from an eating perspective are better if I don't keep milk in the house. So I love milk and peanut butter, like love it. I'll go at 9 o'clock at night and take a big spoonful, out and just sit there and
Yeah.
drink milk and eat peanut butter. And I'm hating myself, right? Like I'm in line at Cinnabon. I'm like, what am I doing? Right? Like, I can't believe I'm doing this, but I love it. So here's what I've done. I've manipulated my environment so that I perform where I'm supposed to. I just don't buy milk.
Yeah.
Because I won't eat it without the milk. The peanut butter will
We'll
just
just
sit
stay
there
on the
without.
shelf.
And it's indicative really like broadly of, who you let around you, the people you spend your time with, how cluttered your house is, the things you're hoarding that you'll never keep. All that occupies mental space
Yeah.
that you could be using towards your next venture.
Yeah. No, 100%. So as we sort of wrap up, are there any sort of final thoughts, things that you would like to share about the book, about anything that you're working on, that we can sort of share with our
So
viewers?
Fleet Force has hit its stride as the largest in the state now. I'm launching the software as a service called Park Pro in June. Park Pro,
Park
yeah.
Pro.
So it's a online web platform and app that connects stadiums, coliseums, arenas, and civic and conference centers with trucking carriers because these guys need parking. These guys have parking. So we have plenty of parking in America. We just don't have a connectivity between those two.
Yeah.
So it's meant to solve that problem. And that's going to be fun because while it's technology, it's a very human centric venture because
Yeah.
these guys put food on the table, keep the lights on, and professional drivers in America keep our economy going. We need to have a quality space for them when they are
Sure.
federally required to stop driving, to stop and rest and have access to amenities. And
Right.
that's going to be a really fun venture. I'm new to that world, so I'm excited about it. But Sarasota was named #1 small town in America for tech startups, right? So
There you go.
I have to do a tech
You
startup.
got to do
That's
it.
a requirement. Yeah. But no, I've got other books coming out, but I will say for those who read this book that um, there are a lot of painful truths in here. And the more self-aware you can become about your own biases and the things that you are telling yourself that may or may not be true, I think the more control you can have over them. It's a sad day when we cede control to things around us and then blame those things for
Yeah.
controlling us.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really the crux of the book is to empower you to choose when you want to work, not work because you have to.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, man. It was good having you here. And where can people find you?
So you can go to Amazon and get Boss Brain.
Okay.
It's still in the top, I don't know, 1,000 or so within entrepreneur books there. And you can put Boss Brain Trey Williams in there, but you can go to treywilliams.com, which is my website. I do a lot of speaking about the book, a lot of speaking about entrepreneurship, actively engage with chambers and economic development councils across the state. Because we're really trying to create a grassroots campaign to
Sure.
at least have the state embrace the need for a thriving and robust startup and small business market to keep large employers,
Cool.
competitive.
Awesome. And you have your website. I know you're on socials, a few different places as well.
Yeah, I think, well, you can always grab me on LinkedIn. There and Facebook are about the only places I think we're posting stuff these days. But
Cool.
really, go to treywilliams.com and you get some cool information about really the mission of
Awesome.
rescuing 1 million entrepreneurs from traditional employment.
Awesome, man. This is Leaders and Legends, inspiring greatness one episode at a time. And thanks for coming in, Trey. We love to have you here, and keep on doing what you're doing, brother.
I enjoy it, man.
Yeah,
Thanks.
bro.